The first time he asked her to dinner, he did it wrong. Not nervously, not clumsily. Kang Joon-hyuk did not do anything clumsily. He did it the way he did everything, with precision and control. And that was exactly the problem. It was a Tuesday afternoon, for days after the archive room. She was at her desk. He appeared in the doorway of the third-floor workspace, which caused a silence to fall across every person in the vicinity in the specific way that silence falls when someone who should not be in a room enters it. He looked at Seo-yun. "Dinner," he said. "Friday, 7 o'clock. Director Choi will send you the details." And he left. Seo-yun stared at the empty doorway for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at her screen. Then she picked up her phone and typed, very calmly, to no one. "He just asked me to dinner through his assistant. He is going to send me details." She did not smile. She did not reply to Director Choi's elegantly worded reservation confirmation when it arrived 40 minutes later. She thought about it for the rest of the day. Then she called him. His personal number, which she had never used before. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not going to dinner with your assistant," she said. "If you want to take me to dinner, ask me yourself." A pause, long enough that she wondered if she had made a catastrophic mistake. "Friday," he said. 7 o'clock. Will you have dinner with me?" "Yes," she said, and hung up before he could hear the way her breath had gone unsteady. If you are new here, welcome to Heartthread Tales. Hit that subscribe button over there and stay with us. And if you're already here because part 1 broke something inside you, welcome back. Are you Team Seo-yun, or are you just here to watch Kang Joon-hyuk lose his mind over a woman who never tried to impress him? And hit that like button right now because this story is only getting started. In his office, Kang Joon-hyuk sat looking at his phone for a moment longer than necessary. Then something happened to the corner of his mouth that Director Choi, passing in the corridor outside, caught a glimpse of through the glass and immediately decided he had not seen. The restaurant he chose was not what she expected. She had braced herself for somewhere spectacular, 50 floors up, panoramic Seoul, the kind of place where the menu had no prices because the clientele did not need to ask. She had prepared herself for the discomfort of being the least expensive thing in the room. Instead, the car stopped on a narrow street in Insadong, in front of a restaurant so small it had no sign. 8 tables, paper lanterns, the kind of place that exists because the food is extraordinary and the owner does not care who knows about it. He was already there when she arrived. Standing outside the door, not inside waiting like a man who expects people to come to him. Standing outside, in the cold, like someone who did not want her to walk in alone. She stopped when she saw him. He was wearing a dark navy coat over a black turtleneck. His hair its usual severe perfection, and he was watching her walk toward him with an expression she had not seen before. Focused and still, and entirely without the cold professional surface he wore inside the building. He looked, simply, like a man waiting for someone he wanted to see. "You found it," he said. "You sent very detailed directions," she said, the ghost of a smile. "Come in. It's cold." The dinner lasted 3 hours. This was not planned. The restaurant had a 2-hour sitting policy that the owner apparently forgot to enforce when he recognized his guest, and Seo-yun and Joon-hyuk sat across from each other in the back corner booth and talked. Actually talked, the way people talk when they have both been starved for a real conversation and suddenly find themselves at the same table. And the food came and went, and the tea came and was refilled twice, and neither of them noticed the time. He told her about the first company, how he had been 24 and terrified and had not told a single person. He was terrified because there was no one to tell, because the expectation around him had always been that he would simply be capable, fully formed, equal to whatever came next. How he had stood in an empty boardroom the night before his first major board presentation and talked himself through it out loud because there was no one to listen. She listened now, and he watched her listen. The way she did it, fully present, not preparing her response while he spoke, but actually receiving what he said, and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for so long he had forgotten it was there. She told him about the third attempt, the application to Kang Group that she had almost not submitted because 2 rejections felt like enough information. How she had written the cover letter at 2 in the morning in the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates, and how she had submitted it before she could talk herself out of it, and how she had not told anyone she applied because she could not survive a third rejection being witnessed. He looked at her across the table. "I'm glad you sent it," he said, quietly, like the understatement of the decade. "Me too," she said, and then because she was honest, she added, "Most days." He laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him, genuine. She had never heard him laugh before. It changed his face completely. The jaw releasing, the eyes warm, the cold precision of him replaced for a second by something younger and less guarded. She stored the sound of it somewhere private and did not examine where. When they finally left, the street outside was quiet and cold, the city muffled under a light November rain that had started while they were inside. She had not brought an umbrella, neither had he, which was the first time she had ever seen evidence that he was capable of being unprepared for something. He removed his coat and held it over them both as they walked the half-block to where her car was waiting, which required him to stand close enough to her that she could feel the warmth of him, the solidity of him, the way he adjusted his pace to match hers without appearing to notice he was doing it. At the car door he stopped. She turned to look at him, rain on his shoulders, his coat still held above them both, his expression doing the thing it did now. Open, present, not performing anything. Again, he said, "Not a question." "Ask me properly," she said, a beat, his dark eyes on hers. "Will you have dinner with me again?" "Yes," she said, "but choose somewhere with an umbrella stand." She got in the car. He stood in the rain watching it pull away, his coat over his arm, getting wet, and did not move until the tail lights disappeared around the corner. The second dinner was a week later, and the third was 4 days after that. And somewhere between the third and the fourth, the thing that was happening between them stopped being something they were being careful about and started being something they were simply living inside. He texted her at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, not a business hour, not a reasonable hour, an unreasonable hour that acknowledged the new geography of things, and said, "Are you still awake?" She was. She texted back, unfortunately. He called. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes about nothing important. A documentary she had watched, a negotiation he was frustrated by, the security guard's ongoing recovery from his cold, a book she had finally finished, and neither of them acknowledged that an hour and 40 minutes of nothing important was its own kind of declaration. She fell asleep with her phone still in her hand. He sat in his study afterward in the silence and understood, with the clarity of a man who has spent his entire life understanding things too late, that he was in serious trouble. The dates continued, each one chosen by him with a specificity that revealed how carefully he had been paying attention. The Han River at dusk, because she had mentioned once in passing that she had always wanted to see it properly and never had time. A private screening of a film she had referenced, once briefly, in a conversation 3 weeks earlier that he had not appeared to be listening to. A bookshop in Hongdae where the owner knew him by name, which meant he had been there before, which meant this was a place that mattered to him, which she filed away silently and did not mention. Each place was chosen not to impress her, but to show her something true about himself, or to give her something she had wanted. And she understood the difference between those two things and understood that he did too, and this was, without either of them saying so, the entire foundation of what was being built between them. She bought him coffee once. Not an occasion. Not a gesture. She was passing the ground floor machine. The good one, on her way back from a meeting, and she thought of him alone in his office at 7 in the morning, and she bought 2 cups, and she took the executive elevator for the first time, and she walked to his office and she knocked. He opened the door. She held out the cup. "The ground floor machine," she said. "It's better." He looked at the cup. He looked at her. Something moved across his face that he didn't entirely contain. "Thank you," he said. The same words he had said in the courtyard, but completely different. Everything different. She nodded and walked back to the elevator. He drank the coffee slowly and thought about the fact that she had thought of him, that the thought had been ordinary and unprompted and had resulted in a cup of coffee delivered by a woman who had no reason to think of him and thought of him anyway, And he understood that this was what it felt like to be cared for without agenda, and he had not known until now that he had never felt it before. He also understood, arriving at his desk, that he was going to do something about this. That evening, at exactly 6:15, he appeared at the door of the third-floor workspace as the day shift was ending and the office was clearing. He did not call ahead. He did not send Director Choi. He walked directly to Seo-yun's desk. She looked up. He held out his hand. Not a gesture with explanation. Just his hand. Open. Extended. Patient. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she took it. They walked out of the Kang group, building together, through the lobby, past the security desk where the elderly guard, now fully recovered from his cold. Watched them pass with the expression of a man who has seen many things in his years and is currently seeing the most interesting one. Through the glass doors, into the Seoul evening, his hand holding hers. And that was that. The building knew by the following morning. Not because he announced it, not because she said a word, but because 30 people had seen them walk out together hand in hand, and 30 people had eyes, and this was a building that ran on information. The reactions were various. Junior staff were collectively undone. The romance of a cold, powerful man choosing a quiet intern was, it turned out, exactly the kind of story that spread through a building's messaging channels at the speed of light. Senior executives recalibrated, professionally and immediately. The landscape had shifted again, and those who understood power understood what it meant when the most powerful person in the building made a visible, public, unambiguous choice. Director Choi arrived at his desk, reviewed his calendar, rescheduled 3 things, and added a personal note that said only, finally. Then he deleted the note. Then he made excellent coffee and said nothing to anyone. And somewhere in the overseas division, Lee Hyun-ah received a forwarded message with a photograph taken in the lobby, and she looked at it for a very long time, and then she began to make calls. What she set into motion would take 3 weeks to arrive. Seo-yun did not know it was coming. She was, in those 3 weeks, doing something she had never quite done before. She was happy, specifically and quietly and without announcement, in the way that people are happy when they have stopped bracing for the thing that takes it away. He picked her up on Saturday mornings, and they went to the market in Namdaemun before the crowds arrived, moving through the stalls in the pale morning light while vendors set up around them, buying things with no purpose, a ceramic mug, a packet of roasted nuts, a small plant she said she was going to kill within a week and did not, and he carried everything she bought and did not comment on the plant. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that appeared rarely and without warning, usually in the form of a single deadpan sentence that arrived so quietly she almost missed it, and that when she caught it and reacted, he looked quietly delighted in the way of someone who is not used to being understood. He learned that she sang to herself when she was cooking, not performing it, not aware of it, just a quiet, private sound that happened, and that she argued with books when she disagreed with them, and that she had strong opinions about coffee that she delivered with the same calm authority she brought to financial methodology, and that she was funnier than she knew, and that she had no idea she was beautiful, which was somehow the most beautiful thing about her. He told her she was beautiful once, on a Friday evening when they were sitting on her apartment floor eating delivery, because neither of them had planned the evening, and it had simply accumulated into staying, and she had looked up from her food with an expression of such complete and unself-conscious skepticism that he had laughed. That real laugh, the one that changed his face. And then she had looked at him with something that was not skepticism at all. He reached across the takeout containers and tucked a strand of her long, straight black hair behind her ear. She went very still. His hand stayed there, not moving, not retreating, warm at her jaw, her hair between his fingers, and his dark eyes were on her, and the Friday evening was very quiet around them. "I'm not performing this," he said. "I know," she said. He leaned forward across the takeout containers. She met him halfway. The kiss was quiet, unhurried, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but instead arrives with the feeling of something that was always going to happen, eventually reaching the moment when it does. His hand at her jaw, the takeout growing cold around them. Seoul outside the window, neither of them moving for a long time after. When she pulled back, she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything, which was correct, because what had just happened did not require words, and both of them knew that, and that knowing was its own form of intimacy. He stayed until midnight. She walked him to her door. He turned at the threshold. "The plant," he said. "Water it on Tuesdays." "I know how to water a plant," she said. "You said you were going to kill it." "I say a lot of things." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he left. She closed the door and stood with her back against it in the dark apartment and breathed. 3 weeks after the lobby, the invitation arrived. The Kang Group Annual Foundation Gala, the most prestigious event on the corporate calendar, attended by the city's most powerful people, photographed extensively, the kind of event where presence and absence both said something. Joon-hyuk invited her, not as a plus one, not a staff, as his guest, explicitly. The invitation arrived at her desk with his handwriting on the envelope, which Director Choi had clearly been instructed to deliver personally, and which read inside, "Only, I'd like you with me. J." She stared at it for a long time. She knew what it meant. To attend this event on his arm was to step into a spotlight she had spent her entire career deliberately avoiding. It was to be visible in the most high-stakes room she had ever been in. It was to be officially, publicly, irrevocably Kang Joon-hyuk's choice. She thought about the archive room, the courtyard, the market on Saturday mornings, his hand in hers walking through the lobby, the kiss that had arrived like something that was always going to happen. She wrote back on a single card, "I'll need a dress." S. He had one delivered the next morning. Deep emerald green, silk, simple and perfectly fitted, with the kind of tailoring that comes from someone who has measured a room with their eyes and understood the person they're clothing without asking a single question. No note, just the dress. She put it on the evening of the gala and stood in her small apartment bathroom mirror for a moment and felt, for the first time in the story, like someone who was walking towards something rather than away from it. He came to her door at 6:30. When she opened it, he went completely still, not performing stillness, actually stopped, his dark eyes taking her in, the dress, her long straight black hair falling loose past her shoulders, the simple small earrings she had chosen, with the expression of a man who is holding himself very carefully in check. "You're staring," she said. "Yes," he said, not apologizing for it. She almost smiled. She stepped out and took the arm he offered, and they went down together into the waiting car, and Seoul moved around them through the darkened windows, and his hand found hers on the seat between them and held it without comment for the entire drive. The gala was spectacular in the way that these things always are, a grand hotel ballroom, chandeliers, 200 guests in their finest, the kind of soft light that makes everything look expensive. She had been here before in a different capacity. She had moved through this room invisible. Tonight, she was not invisible. She walked in on Joon-hyuk's arm and felt the room shift, the subtle collective recalibration of 200 people registering new information simultaneously. Heads turned, eyes moved. She kept her chin level and her expression composed and thought, "I have survived everything this building has thrown at me. I can survive being looked at." He felt her straighten beside him and said nothing, but the hand at the small of her back pressed very slightly, and she understood it as the communication it was, "I have you." The evening proceeded. She met people she had only ever seen in email threads. She held her own in conversations about finance and strategy and international markets, and the surprise on the faces of the people she spoke with was, she noted privately, extremely satisfying. He stayed close but did not hover. He introduced her without diminishing her, without explaining her, without contextualizing her as anything other than exactly who she was. She thought, this is what it looks like when someone respects you in front of other people. She had not known, until now, how much she had needed to see it. Then Lee Hyun-ah arrived. She had flown back from the overseas division for this. Seo-yun understood that immediately, understood the 3 weeks of preparation, the impeccable entrance, the new dress, the carefully arranged group of powerful allies at her back. Hyun-ah moved through the room with the precision of a woman executing a long-planned strategy. She found them near the far windows. "Seo-yun," she said warmly, performing warmth with the same skill, she always had. Don't you look remarkable? Thank you, Seo-yun said, composed. She had been in this woman's presence before. She knew the architecture. It must be quite an experience, Hyun-ah continued, her voice carrying just enough for the people around them to hear. Attending an event like this in your first year. As an intern. A pause, perfectly calibrated. You must be overwhelmed. The room's attention was subtle, invisible, totally on them. Somewhat, Hyun said calmly. Though I found it similar to presenting financial data in front of an executive committee without a deck. You just have to trust what you actually know. A murmur. Someone suppressed a laugh. Hyun-ah's smile stayed exactly where it was. Of course. Though I wonder. And this was the strike she had been building toward for 3 weeks, the thing she had come back for, whether some doors would have been harder to open without a particular key. The room went very quiet. Seo-yun held Hyun-ah's gaze and did not flinch. She did not need to respond. She did not need to defend herself. She had never needed to. But before she could say anything, Joon-hyuk spoke. He had been standing slightly to her left. He had heard every word, and his voice when it came was very quiet and very level and carried the specific weight of a man who does not raise his voice because he has never needed to. Han Seo-yun, he said, corrected a methodology error in our Q3 audit report that would have been challenged in external review. Her name is in the acknowledgments of that report. She presented that correction in front of the full executive committee without preparation, without a deck, and without softening the observation to protect anyone's comfort. He looked at Hyun-ah. Which doors, specifically, do you feel she should not have opened? The silence was absolute. Hyun-ah had no answer. There was no answer. There was only the room and 200 people who had just watched Kang Joon-hyuk publicly, specifically with precision. I apologize for interrupting your evening, Joon-hyuk said to Hyun-ah with the controlled politeness of a man who is not apologizing at all. Then he turned to Seo-yun. Would you like to step out for some air? She looked at him, the expression on his face controlled on the surface, something fierce and certain underneath it. Yes, she said quietly. He guided her toward the terrace doors with his hand at the small of her back, and the room parted for them, and behind them the silence broke into the specific sound of 200 people exhaling and beginning simultaneously to speak. On the terrace, the Seoul night was cool and vast around them. The city glittered below, indifferent and beautiful. She stood at the railing and breathed. He stood beside her and said nothing for a moment, which was exactly right. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. I know, he said. It's going to create talk. Let it. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. Joon-hyuk, she said. She had started using his name without the honorific 3 weeks ago. It still did something to his expression every time she said it. I meant everything I said in there, he said. I would have said it regardless. The only difference is that I am now saying it to someone he stopped. Started again. There are things I am learning to say that I did not know how to say before you. Give me time with this one. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she reached up and straightened the lapel of his jacket, which did not need straightening because she needed something to do with her hands. He looked down at her hands on his jacket. Then he covered them with his. Both of them very still on the terrace. The Seoul skyline burning behind them. The gala behind the glass, its noise muffled and distant. His hands over hers, over his jacket. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Something in him exhaled that he had been holding since the night in the archive room. He lifted her hands from his jacket. He held them. He brought them up between them and looked at them and then looked at her. I know, he said. And the 2 words carried everything he was still learning to say. She smiled. The real one. The one with no audience and no performance. He pulled her toward him. Not dramatically, simply the way he did everything when he had decided to do it, and she came and his arms went around her, and she pressed her face against the warmth of his chest. And they stood like that on the terrace above the glittering city with the cold November air around them, and neither of them moved for a very long time. Inside, 200 people were talking. Out here, they were simply present. Simply together. Simply real. He pressed his lips to her hair. She felt it more than heard it. I am going to be extremely bad at this, he said against her hair. I know, she said. I will probably default to Director Choi at least 3 more times before I learn. I'll call you every time. I'm counting on it. She laughed. He felt it against his chest, and then something settled in him, permanently, irrevocably, into a shape he had not known he was capable of taking. They stayed on the terrace until the chill became impossible to ignore. He kept one arm around her as they went back inside, which caused the room to recalibrate once more, and this time it was final, and everyone who saw it understood. Lee Hyun-ah had already left. They ate dessert. They danced once, which was the first time she had been in his arms in a room full of people who were watching, and she kept her chin up and her spine straight, and his hand at her back was steady and certain and never once made her feel like she was being displayed. At midnight, in the car, she leaned her head against his shoulder. His hand found hers in the dark. Seoul moved past the windows. The plant, he said after a while. What about it? I looked it up. It actually needs water on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She lifted her head. You looked it up. You said you were going to kill it. I was exaggerating. Were you? She looked at him. He was looking at the city out the window, but the corner of his mouth was doing the thing it did. Kang Joon-hyuk, she said. He turned to look at her. You looked up my plant. I did, he said. No apology. She looked at this man, this cold, precise, brilliant, difficult man who had upended her professional life and walked her to her car in the rain and held her hands on a terrace in front of Seoul and looked up her plant and felt something so large and warm and completely undeniable move through her chest that there was nothing left to do with it except say it. I'm falling in love with you, she said, quietly, like something she had known for a while, and was finally done not saying. The car was very still. He looked at her, his dark eyes carrying something that had been building since a gala, a tilting tray, a smile that wasn't for anyone, a name that attached itself to something. I know, he said, his voice lower than usual. I have been watching it happen. From the beginning. Before I understood what I was watching. She waited. I fell first, he said. Simply. Finally. I fell first, and I fell alone, and I did not have a word for it for a very long time. I have one now. She reached up and touched his jaw. He turned his face into her hand. Say it, she said. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were warm, completely unguardedly warm, the cold surface gone, the man underneath it present and visible and hers. I love you, he said. Han Seo-yun. I love you. She kissed him. In the back of a moving car in the middle of Seoul at midnight, with the city streaming past the windows and his arms coming around her and her hands at his face, she kissed him, and he kissed her back with all the precision and all the certainty and all the feeling that this man had ever had and had never before given to anyone. Outside, Seoul continued, indifferent, glittering, entirely unaware that in the back of one black car moving through its streets, something had just become permanent. The plant survived, by the way. She watered it on Tuesdays. He texted her on Thursdays to remind her about Thursdays. She never admitted she had needed the reminder. He never asked her to. Some things do not need to be said. And some people, the kind who check when the light is on and the kind who can finally be checked on, simply find each other and stay. If part 2 broke you open the way we hoped. Share this video right now with someone who needs to believe that the right person exists and is coming. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment? The first dinner? The terrace? The car? Or the plant? Subscribe.